The Sensory Intrusion by the Memeticist. Notice of proprietary architecture. All rights reserved. The concepts, memetic structures, and narrative frameworks contained herein are the property of the Memeticist. Unauthorized duplication, extraction, or redistribution of this data via electronic, mechanical, or extra-dimensional means is strictly prohibited. Vector warning. This is a work of fiction. However, the listener assumes all responsibilities for any subsequent sensory expansion, auditory anomalies, or perceived model collapses during the post-consumption. Names and locales used within a simulated framework. Any resemblance to entities in your current reality is a function of the noise. Chapter 1. I found myself suspended in a trance. A fly caught in the amber of my own making. My heart didn't just beat, it hammered against my ribs like a panicked bird seeking exit. As my senses began to expand, stretching towards the jagged edges of my consciousness, a war broke out between my pulse and my reason. They fought over how to translate this new exotic perception, a sensory intrusion that felt both ancient and illicit. It was as if this otherness had always been there, resting on the edge of my nose like a familiar pair of spectacles. Only now I had finally noticed the smudge, cleaned the glass, and seated them properly. Yet it was alien. It felt natural only if I forced the logic, the way a broken limb feels natural once the shock sets in. I shifted in my recliner, trying to nestle into the mundane. Fear arrived first, a cold, oily slick on the back of my neck, accompanied by its twin, doubt. But this time, I was the confident. I would hold the reins. A knit blanket, a dusty relic from the previous owner, smelling faintly of cedar and stagnant thyme, was bunched over my legs. It didn't need to be thrown out. It was a tether to the floor, to the room, to the sane. I anchored myself with the rhythm. 3 seconds in, 2 seconds held. 3 seconds of stale air departing. Repeat. The process was automatic, a machine of breath. Beyond the edges of my skin, the air began to sour. I could hear a rushing in my ears, not the sound of blood, but the roar of a distant, unseen ocean. I felt a shift, a tectonic disturbance just beyond the perimeter of me. It was the vertigo of being lost at sea, where every swell of dark waters disoriented the soul. This wasn't falling asleep. Mentally, I wasn't drifting. I was wading in. Step by heavy step, I fell into a pressurized deep. The breathing pattern began to throb behind my eyes. The rushing grew into a deafening static, a white noise scream that abruptly snapped into silence. The world sharpened to a lethal edge. To test the tether, I twitched a finger and wiggled a toe. The flesh responded, but the mind saw more. The colors had no names. Geometric fractals that pulsed with a nauseating rhythmic life began to bleed through. I opened my physical eyes. The room was still there, the lamp, the peeling paint, the dust motes, but it was drowned in a pervasive fractalating shapes. They twisted and turned, dividing and diving. These patterns were persistent, patient. My eyes closed and looked inward. Darkness, but not empty. My palms were suddenly slick with a cold, metallic sweat. I wiped them frantically on the blanket and reset. 5 seconds in, 4 seconds out, 1 second of empty, hollow lungs. Then the color returned. It was a hue that defied the spectrum, not blue, not white, but a shimmering, sickly luminescence that vibrated between the two. I felt the membrane of reality thinning. I pressed against it with the weight of my intent. It rippled like the surface of a black pond, distorted and vivid. A silhouette flickered within the ripples, someone turning away, moving with a jointless grace, and then they were gone. I gasped, wrenched back with my lungs burning. I had forgotten to restart the cycle. The air in the room suddenly felt suffocating, like inhaling wet wool. Strengthening my resolve, I pressed harder against the veil. The not white color surged back, but its shape had curdled. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a pattern. It was a cluster of tendrils reaching from a center that felt infinitely heavy. It didn't just see me, it felt me. It was a gaze that commanded obedience. It was growing closer, and the air in the room began to smell of something scorched, like burnt hair and old wires. I shoved with my entire being. Something gave way as the resistance snapped. Silence. Absolute. An alien sensation seized my marrow. It can smell me thinking about it. It remembers the taste of being known. Then, a sound horrid and intimate. It was the sound of a plastic bottle being crunched softly, overlaid with the whisper of silk sheets sliding against one another. "This isn't a joke," a voice echoed. It was my own voice, but the tone was wrong. It was cold judgment, dripping with an authority I did not possess. "You need to stop. You have no right." A slithering sensation uncoiled deep inside my gut, a physical weight shifting where no weight ought to be. It started to move. With a jolt, I threw off the blanket and stood up. The room was silent, the shadows were still, but the air tasted of copper, and I knew, with the certainty of the damned, something had changed.